Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey, what's up, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Just had a few minutes here to work on some One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute videos, and finally got a new cell phone cover, which means that the image is not all cloudy, which is unfortunate for you because I have an 8 head, not a 4 head, and I'm unfortunate to look at sometimes. Anyways, just got back from George Washington's Mount Vernon Distillery, finishing up some apple brandy that we started on last spring. We got to double some of it last spring and got the rest of it stripped and all that good stuff and got it ready to go to double, which we just finished up doing this past week. Really cool cast of characters out there this time around, including my brothers Aiden Pemberton and Eric Wolf and JJ Jackson, and Amanda Bryant was there, and my brother Steve Bayshore, of course, and just so many good people. It's such a cool experience to get to go out there, not only because it's Washington's distillery, which in and of itself is amazing, but Steve Bayshore, who heads up the program at the distillery, really does an amazing job of curating talented, interesting individuals. Paul Menta, Key West First Legal Rum Distillery. I mean, just really, really amazing people. It's kind of like a reset for me in many ways. You know, sometimes you got to step away from what your normal routine, your normal habits, your normal life is, and step into a different situation. Excuse me, weather changed here again, and yeah, got a little bit of that gunk going on, but anyways, almanacs. Listen, guys, they are on their way. So, like all things with the postal system, they're working their way through the postal system. For some reason, anything that seems to be coming through Louisville or Indianapolis, specifically Louisville, really, seems to be having issues the past couple months, and I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that, but they are on their way to you. The cool thing is, I can guarantee you that this is the last time that an almanac won't reach people until March in terms of physical copy, because the new one will be done into the printers by the end of July, meaning that hopefully, regardless of what happens, I'll have them to send out by October for the 2026 almanac. So, rest assured, the 2025s are coming. They are still available. We did order plenty of extra physical copies for those of you who still want to order one over at thealchemistcabinet.com. Of course, that almanac goes to support everything that I do here at the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, plus if you have ghosts, plus everything else that I really do that's extra outside of Old Homestead Distillery. Old Homestead Distillery is getting incredibly close to opening up, by the way. April seems to be the time frame. While I was out at Mount Vernon, several of us also embarked on a yeast foraging trip, and we were able to capture some wild yeast, which Eric is currently drying down at Stolen Wolf Distillery and is about to send my direction. I'll start propagating that up for a special project this November. And we'll get more into those details a little bit later down the line, but suffice it to say, we got pretty far out in the woods, out by the old mill pond area, which is no longer active anymore, where we might have actually been able to find some historic yeast. May not even be historic yeast. It might be something that Mount Vernon's used in the recent history. But it's been out there long enough, more than likely it's changed pretty substantially, and I'm pretty excited to see what that yeast does when we get it back here, and I'm really excited for the project. Won't tell you what it is yet, because it's not my project to tell you guys, even though I am involved in it. It is a team effort at Mount Vernon and elsewhere, as it always is. But anyways, let's get into your questions. So, first question here tonight from George Leonard. Hey, Alan, thanks again for all you do for the community. My question relates to heads cuts on a double pot still single malt. My still 30-quart stainless kettle, copper dome lid, 2-inch copper riser, no packing, 24-inch high, 30-inch slow decreasing, double air cooled fin condenser. Wow. Produces 80% plus distillate for at least 40 minutes at a fast drip during the spirit run. During the spirit runs, I always take off about 100 mil 4 shots and then do a heads cut, no stronger than 75%. For a 5-gallon charge, this yields about 600 milliliters of heads. At a sensory level, I stop smelling acetone after about 300 mils. I use a proof and trails hydrometer corrected for temperature at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I know at a commercial level, the high end for production is specified at no more than 80% by the TTB Standards of Identity for Whiskey, but I don't know why this standard exists. I tend not to reserve my heads for future spirit runs, so the heads end up being used for killing weeds. I wonder if I'm taking too narrow a heads cut. Do you have any thoughts about this? I have read that the commercial distilleries rarely do cuts solely based on sensory inputs, and I'm curious about your practices at Old Homestead if you care to comment. Thanks from your fan, George. Well, thanks, George. Those are great questions. So let's go to the TTB standard. So the 80%, 160 proof. That's basically so that you were making sure that you were staying true to the style of American whiskey, being a heavy-bodied whiskey, bourbon, rye, etc., being very characteristic of the grain that it's distilled from. That was a traditional standard, and traditional pot still distillation was not ever going to get over, 160 proof most of the time with double pot still distillation. And they went through specific pains to design column style stills that would do the same thing. So that's really kind of where that proof thing comes from. It also comes from the fact that once you start getting above that, you're getting into what they call light whiskey territory. An unfortunate name. And at one point in time, they tried to push light whiskey out on the public, and the public, they just completely flat denied it, which kind of sucks because there's some really cool things that can happen at those higher proofs. In terms of making cuts. So I do all of my cuts by sensory. I might use proof or temperature as sort of, a secondary or tertiary consideration. If I think that if I'm going from heads into hearts, I'm for sure going to record when I go from heads into hearts on my paperwork, by proof, but it's all going to be by sensory. It's all going to be by aroma for the most part. Sometimes it's also touch. Sometimes it's also taste. But definitely all sensory. The same thing going into tails. Now, with tails, sometimes I might rely on a hydrometer a little bit more, but it's still going to be primarily sensory. And most small craft distillers, I know it's all sensory, just like that, just the same as what we're doing. I would say if you're smelling acetaldehyde or ethyl acetate, you're still in your heads, and probably not making a wide enough heads cut. Potentially, you definitely don't want that acetaldehyde or ethyl acetate in there. The ethyl acetate, you can leave some of that behind, that kind of earthy, musty sort of smell after you get out of the fingernail polish remover smell. Before the grain gets really prominent on the aroma, you might notice there's sort of this kind of earthy post-drain, almost ozone style smell that comes across a lot of times with spirits. If you're going into a cask for any amount of time, you want a little bit of that for sure. But you'd be surprised how small sometimes a heads cut can be. But I've seen it go both directions. A lot of that depends on the yeast that you're using as much as anything, and whether or not you're able to actually properly vent any of the volatiles that you may not want off the still, as we talked about here before, with the way that venting systems on stills are supposed to work when they're designed properly. I can tell you, for example, let's say on a 350 gallon still, 1200 gallon strip. So yeah, basically 1200 gallons of mash. I have seen heads cuts be anything from minus a couple gallons of 4 shots. Same mash bill, and dependent on yeast, heads cut might be 15 gallons, but I've seen as little as 7 gallons. It really depends on a number of factors. Temperature, yeast, both being pretty major amongst those. So, sorry for bumping the camera there, guys. I got to get a new tripod. Ours broke. But let's see what other questions we've got here this evening. So, this one's from Sam. So, hey, Alan, thanks for your continued contributions to the wider distilling community. Your videos are an important resource for many budding distillers, in my opinion. It's hard to find an audience in Australia for absinthe, but I'd love to know where my products fit into the market. Have you ever considered conducting a competition amongst your distilling community? That might be fun. I'd love to see a live competition of spirits from around the world being addressed. It could be specific recipes or best expression of an apple brandy or anything you might be interested in. Thanks again for your content, Sam. So, I'm not opposed to that. I think it's a pretty cool idea, truthfully. Figuring out how to handle that, especially from a legal standpoint, since, shipping through the mail is not necessarily kosher everywhere. And shipping home-produced spirits through the mail is even more blurry. It's something I might consider, though, at some point in time. Let me do some thinking on that. I would want a really, really good panel for that, and I would want a fairly large panel. I think maybe up to 9 people might be pretty interesting, right? And you'd have to do it category by category over time. Apple brandy first, absinthe, bourbon, rye, whatever. That's a good idea. I like that. sort of like the tastings that we used to do, that we still do every once in a while. Kim and I still have a historic one yet to do with some samples from a good friend of mine that collects vintage whiskeys. Let me do some thinking on that, but I am not at all opposed to that idea. That actually sounds like a lot of fun, and I bet Christy Atkinson would be up for it from Distillers Talk too. From Terry, I see people talking about the ABV of their wash or mash before they distill it. It seems they all take the specific gravity, subtract the final gravity, and multiply it by 132 or 131.25 or 131.5. Where does that number come from? No one has ever told me, and I personally don't pay that much attention. I kind of know what I'm going at to get as far as yield from what I'm making, but I also am the type that can't not know. Thanks again. So 131.25 is the correct number as far as I know. I'm sure there'll be somebody in the comments that'll correct me. Probably somebody that actually knows more than I do. That happens sometimes. I don't know where the number actually comes from. It's called beer pie, like PI. But in terms of where that math comes from, I don't know. I guess it's one of those things, sort of like folk magic. I've never been that concerned with why it worked, just that it did work. And I saw it everywhere that I'm sure you've seen it, in every book that I've ever read and every formula that I've ever seen. But as far as the origins of beer pie, that is a very good question. I'd have to go and look at the math and maybe think it through and see if I couldn't figure it out. And maybe I'll do that at some point in time. But it won't be tonight because I'm still tired from being out at Mount Vernon and traveling and had to work today. And I'm old and curmudgeonly and it's not getting any better. So we've probably got time for one more here. Let's see what we got. All right. Ooh, this is going to be a good one. So from George, hey Alan, your recent post on the Mount Vernon distillery got me wondering about line arm history and practice. It seems that traditional pot stills have a cone-shaped line arm that may be tilted up, down, or level. Other than moving ethanol vapors away from live fire heating the kettle, what are the benefits to line arm shapes, lengths, diameters, etc.? I do realize that copper line arms increase beneficial contact with ethanol. Wondering if there's some alchemical things at work here. Thank you, Alan, for what you do for the community. You are so much appreciated. Thank you, man. Yes, line arm certainly affects everything. So the reason they tend to be conical and then sort of reducing down is because you don't want to do a big pinch immediately out of the still cap into the line arm. Now, a lot of modern stills are made like that, including mine at Old Homestead, as well as the ones I had at Spirits of French Lick. And there are things that you have to do and ways you have to run in order to sort of work around that technical flaw. So you want them to reduce slowly over time, and you don't ever want them to pinch. A lot of line arms and a lot of lines in general on home distilling equipment, a lot of them are very, very small, too small. They pinch, restrict flow, etc. What you want out of all of the areas where vapor is going to come into contact with copper is sort of a gradual, slow movement so that you get clouding effects, right? So that copper contact you're talking about, that needs to be clouded. It needs to not be forced, needs not to be pinched, which is going to also muddy your cuts. It needs to be like a cloud, just a nice, gentle little cloud coming across. In terms of tilting up, down, or level, so those things all relate to reflux, right? So if you tilt slightly up, say a 45-degree angle, the top of that line arm is going to be colder than the bottom for quite a bit longer, and it's going to take a little longer to heat up, and so therefore it's going to cool down, it's going to cool the vapor down, and it's going to drop some of it back into the still as reflux, sort of a passive reflux apparatus, as it were. Straight across, it's going to be fairly neutral. 45 down, that's going to be pretty heavy bodied, right? You're going to be able to get a lot more heavy congeners across at that 45 down than you will to 45 up, or even and across. This also comes in, the shape of the pot still head, for example, also plays into this. You might notice at Mount Vernon there are horse head stills, which are flat topped, and there are round onion type stills, which are basically a ball on top, and those both react quite differently when it comes to reflux. It's much easier to get reflux out of the onion tops, especially by pulling your fire back a little bit and maybe making sure that your flake stand, your worm barrel is full of cold water, which builds up cold air in the worm and allows that to move up the line arm to the head so that you can actually hold reflux before you start running for a little while and sort of compress your heads. But it's actually much easier to hold reflux in one area with those horsehead stills, even though those horsehead stills aren't designed specifically to be looking for reflux. The gooseneck style line arms, the ones that you see that are kind of like an S in a certain way, shape, or form. There's several different variations on those. Again, that has to do with clouding and vapor travel and sort of pillowing everything over as opposed to just pushing it through as hard as you can. And some of those that you see, the real old ones, they might have a real sharp dip down and a real sharp dip up, almost like a U. Think of that like a P-trap. So what you can do, if you run them right, is you can actually drop some reflux into that low-lying little P-trap area and then actually sort of have this kind of small amount of inline thumping happening. Not enough to be anything major, not enough to do single pass or anything like that, but just enough to drive reflux a little bit higher than what you might ordinarily get off any other kind of stills. So anyways, guys, I think that's all I've got for this evening. And listen, I'll update you again on this Mount Vernon yeast project that we all have going on, because it's really, really cool. I'll get a ferment going up with that and going with that once I get it here in the mail. And like I said, order the almanac, thealchemistcabinet.com. Keep an eye on oldhomesteaddc.com for Old Homestead Distillery to open up. And hopefully I'll be able to do some more process stuff here before too long. I get caught up at work. I plan on doing a lot more process-based stuff at work, and maybe even start outlining some sort of class ideas for the classes we plan on having at Old Homestead. Make you guys some sort of preview videos of what you can expect out of those classes. So, all right, guys. Love y'all. Later.